we have left off with Uncle Laban tricking Jacob into marrying his first daughter, not the one Jacob wanted, but the one that Laban wanted to give to Jacob. That was the older sister, Leah. And he served Laban for 7 years for Rachel, but wound up with Leah. And then he also wound up with Rachel. So he's got both these sisters now, and he's having to raise them. Having to raise a family through them and with them. You remember Leah had 4 children through Jacob, because of Jacob. Rachel, on the other hand, was barren and was unable to have children. And so that's where the story picks up here. Of course, with that comes all of the jealousies, the problems, the conflicts that are going to happen between the two women, the two sisters. One's jealous that she can't have kids, but she does have the love of her husband. And the other's jealous that she can't have the love of her husband, but she's happy to have the kids. So it's sort of a conflict that has been brewing between the two sisters. And chapter 30, that conflict really comes to the surface here. Now, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." Well, I imagine Jacob's thinking, well, I've done everything I could possibly do. I don't know what's left to do, especially in that day and age. The problem, of course, is here is that situation, as I sort of mentioned, that Leah, the older sister and obviously the older wife, wanted to be loved like Rachel was loved. But we see Rachel wanting to have kids like Leah had. In other words, it's always going to be greener on the other side of the fence. We always seem to find that there's someone that we think is better than us. But if you keep looking, you'll also find someone who's worse than us. The idea is to stop looking at things like that and more just keep your eyes on the Lord and learn to be content in whatever circumstance that we're in, and let God be the one who sorts all those things out. We do what we can do. There's an old saying, you pray, you do your best, and you commit the rest. You pray, you do your best, you commit the rest. There's certain things that you just can't fix. You can't fix certain things. They are what they are, and you can't change them. It's important that we don't strive and struggle like this poor family did, but rather to just accept God's place that He has us in at this moment. And He can, at any time, as we're going to see, change the circumstance. It helps if our hearts and minds and attitudes are in the right place. Well, Jacob wasn't happy. His anger, it says in verse 2, was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" I love how the Bible records all the warts and wrinkles of these holy patriarchs. This is a family squabble. Who do you think I am? I can only do so much. I mean, this is a real family fight. In the Bible, it's written there, right there. Meaning, it's okay to fight, so long as it's a biblical fight. Have a biblical fight, and then make sure that you don't let the sun go down on your wrath. That's a biblical fight. You do the best you can, and again, you pray, you do your best, and you commit the rest. Well, I love that the Bible doesn't hide the truth of these people. They're weak, they're bumbling, they're like us, and yet they love the Lord. And that's how we want to be as well. Know that we're not going to be perfect, but we definitely want to love the Lord. Well, he scolds her, I'm not God, and you notice that he sort of puts the blame on God as to why she was barren. But I have to be honest with you, we don't know why women are barren. There's no real reason. It's not because God closes the womb, though He can, and we see there are cases in the Bible that we might surmise that, but it's not always the case. We are in a fallen world. Our bodies are failing and weak and broken themselves, and it's possible to have illnesses. It's possible to have problems where people can't have children. And that's just the way it is. And it's not that we have to blame God. It's not that we need to blame anyone. Today, we happen to live in an age where certain medicines and procedures can sort of remedy those situations, thankfully. And so we shouldn't be afraid of them. Whereas at the same time, we just, as I said, want to be content in the Lord. And when God gives us a direction, we step out and we do it. And if we can overcome such shortcomings or weaknesses or physical infirmities where we cannot produce a child, if there's a medical way we can do so and you want to and you feel cleared of the Lord to do so, that's absolutely okay to do so. Well, here Jacob is saying God is doing this, not me. Don't blame me, blame God, kind of a thing. And I'm suggesting you don't have to blame God. So she said, here is my handmaid, my maid, Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. And remember, we talked about this. This is a situation where Bilhah is the maid, the handmaiden of Rachel, sort of like an extension of herself. And so by their custom and by their law, this is where it becomes odd. It's a custom of that day where the handmaid could actually, if you will, lay across the wife who was barren while the husband impregnates her. That's the way it was done then. It's really bizarre to us. It's not something that we can imagine, though we're not far from that in that we have surrogate mothers, surrogate parents. I have a dear friend of mine who lives in another state. She was a surrogate to another woman. Of course, she wasn't impregnated the way that this was done. She was done medically in a kind of a sterile environment. This is a whole different sort of a thing here. Nonetheless, it's the same sort of thing. Bilhah becomes the surrogate mom for Rachel. And so this is what it means here when it says, she will bear a child on my knees. That's what that means. And it's also possible and probable that when the child was actually being born, when it was being birthed, that Rachel would have been there, and at the same time, Bilhah would have laid across her lap, so to speak, so that the baby appears to come across or come out of Rachel's womb, and then she becomes the legal mother of the baby. That's sort of what this whole thing means here. So that's why we see these children that are born in this way are absolutely part of Jacob's family and the 12 tribes of Israel. That's what these kids are going to become. Well, then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my cause. He has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. Now, this is Jacob's fifth son, the four that came from Leah, and now Dan is the fifth one. It means judge or judgment. And she's kind of having this competition thing with her sister, and this is all about that. God knows that, I wasn't happy about this, so he judged fairly, and now I'm a mom, is the way she sees it. In verse 7, Rachel's maid conceived a second time again, and bore Jacob a second son. And then Rachel said, with great wrestlings, I have wrestled or contended with my sister, and indeed I win. I have prevailed. So she has called his name Naphtali. Naphtali is a word that means conflict or to wrestle or wrestling. But this struggle between her sister and her was real. It was a real struggle. And I don't think there's a woman here who wouldn't sense that struggle. And you can imagine what it would be like to live in this kind of an ancient situation where the woman is really a property, and she didn't have much to say about what went on. As you see, the men sort of ruled things. Of course, we've changed that today. We don't live in that kind of a day, though some women might argue with that. And we don't live in that sense in that way much anymore. And she called his name Naphtali. Well, Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, so she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob, his wife. And right now, I'm sure Jacob is looking for some sort of energy drink or something. But Zilpah now is going to bear a child in verse 10. And, this would be comical if it wasn't so sad. It's really a pathetic activity of a dysfunctional family. This is how dysfunction is appearing. And of course, when Rachel gave Jacob Bilhah to his to bear a child, that may have been the custom, but it was really an act of the flesh. That was the flesh. It wasn't a spiritual move at all. The weird thing about the whole thing is that God honors the whole thing. He blesses it. He seems to be okay with it, as he is taking all of these kids and they're going to become the nation of Israel. So it's all a part of his plan. I honestly don't try to figure it out, because it's going to be difficult to justify it from our modern way of thinking. It's an ancient thing, but God used it for his glory in the end. And that's the way we have to see it. Fortunately, we don't do those things today, though I did see where one soccer player decided to marry two women in a recent ceremony. I forget where it was. It was Peru or somewhere like that. A soccer player married two women at the same time. So it's coming. And obviously, the way our society and culture is today, it won't be just Mormons who have more than one wife. We'll see that probably, and probably women with more than one man. I'm sure we'll see all sorts of kooky things coming as we get closer and closer to the end of the earth as we know it. So Leah is now in competition. Leah's handmaid in verse 10 bore Jacob a son. Leah said, "A troop comes." So she called his name Gad. The name Gad means troop or fortune. In other words, I'm so fortunate to have so many kids. That's sort of how she's viewing it. And once again, this was born in the same way through the handmaid Zilpah. And that means the baby then belongs to Leah. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And then Leah said, "I'm happy for the daughters will call me blessed," meaning the daughters of this land will call me blessed. And so she named the child Asher, or happy. I'm so happy because the women are going to call me blessed, so I'm going to name my baby Happy. And so the kid ran around saying, "I'm happy, happy, happy." And you know that song. Anyway, Reuben is the oldest son of Jacob, the first child. Asher, that was born, now becomes the 8th son of Jacob. Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and scrounged up some mandrakes. Mandrakes, I believe, are like a root. And they're apparently something that they would eat. They enjoyed them in some ways. I've never had a mandrake. I can't tell you what they taste like. But apparently, they are believed to make women fertile. So they found Reuben found these mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Well, Rachel heard about it and said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." If they're going to make a woman fertile, of course, then Rachel's thinking, maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe something will happen here. But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Now you want to take away my son's mandrakes also?" It's sort of crazy, I'm telling you. I think it's a funny story. And Rachel said, therefore, he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. So now they're bartering who gets to sleep with Jacob over these mandrakes. And when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you have to come home with me tonight, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. And so he laid with her that night. It's possible that Jacob actually lived with Rachel in the same tent, and he made different visitations as needed. And so here he winds up then with Leah at the cost of her son's mandrakes. And as I said, God is doing all of this, and he's doing it because of his promise that he made to Abraham. Honestly, it's not because we don't want to be confused about all of the drama that's going on. God had a plan, and he just so happened to have used humans to accomplish this plan. Keep in mind that when we consider Israel as God's chosen people, he doesn't choose them because they were so good. That wasn't the case. God has a plan, and that plan is going to be worked out with or without human help. But as we see along the way, humans are going to do their best to help, but they're sort of going to bundle it. They're going to be bumbling idiots through the entire event. Well, notice verse 17. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Well, that's actually his ninth son, but it's Leah's fifth child. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Now, again, it's Jacob's ninth son, and Issachar he doesn't play a huge role in Israel's history, but nonetheless, he is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. And so she called his name Zebulun. And that's actually Jacob's 10th son now. And after she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah or Dinah. And Dinah is another name, also means judgment. So apparently she's kind of got judgment on the brain, or sort of like I told you so is what this is. This is the implication here. Then God remembered Rachel. God remembered Rachel. In other words, Rachel is going to, well, I'll read the verse. God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Keep that in mind. It wasn't the gimmick of the mandrakes. It was God who heard her prayer and chose by his sovereign will to answer that prayer. That's how these things work. Sometimes God says yes to our prayers. Sometimes God says no. Sometimes God says not now. And so this was a prayer that he had every intention of answering. But throughout her entire marriage to Jacob, it was not now, not now, not now, until he said now. And this is where it came now, where God remembered her, he listened to her, and he opened her womb. We might say from that, he healed her from whatever illness was there that was preventing her from having children. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph. There he is, Joseph. And said, the Lord shall add to me another. And the beautiful story we're going to read about Joseph, and the name literally means he will add. God is going to add even more. We know that Rachel does have one other child. We'll save that story for when we get there. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country." Let me go home to my folks. They haven't seen my kids yet. We want to leave, is what he's saying. Remember, he's been here now 20 years or so. And so give me my wives and my children. No, actually, by this time, he's been here about 14 years. So we'll see in a bit. "Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service which I have done for you." And Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." So Laban was a conniver, remember. He was a guy that was always manipulating, always trying to squeeze a nickel out of a penny kind of a thing. He was always trying to get one up on someone. And that, when you live a life like that, there's a lot of striving involved in it, and a lot of pressure, a lot of agitation, anxiety, and miserable feelings when things don't go your way. And though you lay out all of your plans the best way that you possibly can, and it doesn't go your way, it drives you crazy. And I imagine that's Laban's life. He's always trying to manipulate a situation to work out for his best, but then comes this guy named Jacob. And Jacob is just, remember, he served those 14 years out of love for his wife, Rachel. And that's why he did it. So to him, he was just kind of killing time, just taking it easy. Well, along the way, God was blessing everything that Jacob was doing. Jacob at this point wasn't manipulating, he was just hanging out. The manipulation's coming. But at this point, he was just doing his thing. And it sort of reminds me of how we're supposed to be in our Christian life. We're doing our thing. We're living for the Lord, but at the same time, we're doing the best we can, working hard at our job, paying our bills, doing everything we're supposed to do, and watch as God blesses us little at a time. Well, Jacob was especially blessed. I think it's in this case where it says, "I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." This is an anointing upon his life, similar to the anointings that we have upon our lives, in that we've been called by God to go into a community, to go into a world and be salt and light. As salt and light, the idea is we will make an impact wherever we are. We're going to influence people. People are going to see it or taste it, if you will. Salt and light. And it will make a difference in their lives in our community. And when we're not there, they're going to notice the absence. That's the idea here and the way we're supposed to be. We are the fragrance of Christ, the New Testament tells us. Meaning that there's also then a smell, an aroma that's supposed to be a good thing because we are there in a person's life, a non-believer's life. Well, he said in verse 28, "Name your wages and I will give it." What's your price? I don't want you to leave. I'm prospering with you in my life. I don't want you to go. So name your price. So Jacob said to him, "You know how I have served you now and how your livestock has been with me. I've been your shepherd boy. I've taken care of all of your animals. That has been my duty for all of these years." And he said, "For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house?" And this whole time, I've really only done my job to help you and to build up your prosperity and not mine. I've got nothing. I could leave now with nothing. And that's what he was saying. Let me just go. I'll take my family and go. And Laban is saying, "No, we can't do that. I want you to stay." And Jacob is saying, "Look, you know God has blessed me, and in turn he has blessed you." Verse 31, he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. Now, typically, the speckled, spotted ones, they were not the ones that were the more prominent ones. The white ones or the single-colored ones were the more prominent ones. So Jacob was sort of putting himself at a disadvantage. Give me this minor thing, you take the major thing, and I'll continue to run your flock. But anytime there's one of these spotted ones or these brown ones come out, I take that. That'll be my wage. And so my righteousness, he says in verse 33, so my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among my goats, the brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen if it is with me. So that's how we'll tell them apart. Any speckled ones in your herd belong to me, or your flock belong to me, and any white ones in your flock, in my flock, belong to you. It's a simple thing. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word, or as you wish. In other words, that's fair. It's an agreement. Let's do that. So Laban removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, everyone that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons, into Laban's sons. And then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob Jacob cared for Laban's flocks. That's what it means there. He fed the rest of Laban's flock. He cared for, he was the shepherd over them. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, and he peeled white strips in them and exposed the white which was in the rods. The rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters and in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should or would conceive when they came to drink the water. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted goats and sheep. Now, was this what we might call today animal husbandry? Was it an actual technique of birthing or engineering, is this the original genetic engineering of a breed of animal? Or is it just manipulation of the flesh? It seems it's possible that it's manipulation, as we're going to see as the story continues. God sort of kind of puts a kibosh on all of that. But this is the story as it goes, as it reads here, that Jacob did something to trick Laban. And what he did was this little, maybe it was superstition, maybe it was an actual thing, but it's not anything we know about today in our habits with animals. But he peeled rods or trees or limbs and made them sort of white. He kind of stripped the bark off of it and put it in the watering trough where the animals would come and drink. And at the same time, it would get them excited, and that's where they would conceive and they would mate right there at the watering trough. And then they'd go off, and later on, they'd come out speckled and spotted. And so it's sort of an odd thing. I don't understand it, but here it is. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flocks. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man Jacob became exceedingly prosperous, meaning massively wealthy, and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Whatever happened, there was an incredible reversal of fortune. Laban had them all at one time, But over the course of time, that herd, the flock of sheep and goats, all went over to Jacob in the form of spotted and speckled animals, as opposed to the pure ones that Laban had. Now, Jacob heard the words of Laban's son saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has acquired all this wealth. So he robbed us, is what they're saying, and that's not a safe place to be if you're Jacob. Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed, it was not good. It was not favorable toward him as before. Before, Laban said, this guy is valuable, I have to have him. But now Laban is thinking, this guy's killing me, I got to get rid of him. That's kind of what's happening. Well, the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers, to your family, and I will be with you. I like this verse. This verse is what God says to an anointed person when the person needs to know that it doesn't matter where you are, I'm going to bless you. I'm asking you now to obey me. I want you to leave this very prosperous situation and go, and I'll bless you wherever you go. Don't worry about the money. Don't worry about the lambs or the goats. I know that this is a big deal for you, and I've given it all to you. Take them with you, but now it's time to go. And until God says go, you got to stay. But when God says go, you got to go. And you don't linger around, and you don't wonder about, whether it's going to be financially approved or not. You just go when God says go. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock. And he said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as it was before. But the God of my father has been with me. And it's good that he sees this now. Remember, he had that bartering thing. If you will be with me, if you will bless me, if you will do this, then I'll let you be my God. Well, here he's coming to the conclusion, apparently God was with me. Apparently everything that I asked him to do, he has done. And verse 6, he says, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me, and he's changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. That is huge. This is an outlook, an attitude of life that the children of faith need to acquire. We need to learn how to live this way. It's a philosophy of life, that when I'm walking in the will of God, man can take his best shot, but I cannot be hurt beyond what God allows me to be hurt. We have to learn that lesson of life so that we can walk with great confidence in God, that everything we do is in his hands. And so God did not allow him to hurt me. That doesn't mean that he didn't change his wages 10 times. He did. It doesn't mean that it's not frustrating and uncomfortable. But in the end, Jacob walks away with all of the prize. He won everything, even though it was hard and it was difficult. This is a lesson of life and a lesson of faith that we have to understand and learn it and then begin to walk in faith in that way. In other words, he's explaining this. God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, well, the speckled shall be your wages. And then all the flocks bore speckled. If he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages. Then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Now, I personally believe that is absolutely the truth. This is the truth, that God did all of this. I'm just not sure that Jacob believed it. What I mean is, he's telling his wives this, but it's possible that in the back of his head, he's giving God credit, but there's a part of him that's saying, but I did help with the rods and the stripes and the watering troughs and all that. And so he may be holding on to a little bit of his own thing, but I think the way to see this is that God is showing him here to stop manipulating. You don't have to. I've got your back. I've got this, so you don't have to worry about it. And it happened in verse 10. At the time when the flocks conceived, that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. So this is in a dream that Jacob is seeing this. God is showing it to him, and it's as if he's going, this is God doing it. It's not the trickery that you think you're doing. You think you're so smart. It's got nothing to do with that. So you don't have to manipulate. When God is in it, leave it be and watch how God will work. You pray, you do your best, you commit the rest. And Jacob is coming to grips with this, that he realizes that all of my striving and my fleshly manipulation was a waste of time. And in verse 11, then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift your eyes now and see, all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. God is protecting Jacob now, protecting his future, protecting God's promise to him. God is doing this. Do not touch my anointed ones. Do not do my prophets any harm. In Psalm 105, it says this. Don't touch the anointed. And so God is going to watch over Jacob, because Jacob is the anointed of the Lord in this situation. He's going to bring forth the family of the Messiah. And so because of that, God has his protection around this family. Nothing can hurt Jacob. And he's, again, I say it this way, he's coming into the realization of that. And so he says, I am the God of Bethel. You remember, I introduced myself to you when you were laying your head on that stone pillow. Remember? You saw the ladder going up, and with the angels going up and down, in and out of heaven. That was me. I'm the one who showed you that. And so he says, I am that God. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise and get out of this land and return to the land of your family. And here he is now being led by God. God is leading him in the same way that he led Abraham, his grandfather. Abraham was led out of his family and into another place. Well, now God is asking Jacob to take his children and his wives and his herds and go back to that place where I sent your grandfather. Go there now. And then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? And are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. In other words, they're materialistic a little bit here. As they're saying basically there's really nothing left for us here anyway. He spent it all. It's all gone. He lost it all, and he gave it. It's all yours now. So we're going with the money. We're going with you. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. So for the first time in this entire family's history, we have family unity. And who knew? Out of all this, really, who knew? So it took all of this struggling and this manipulation for them to come together as one. And it took Uncle Laban to do that. It's funny what happens out of the midst of a strife, out of a problem, how God can always bring good out of it, even in the worst of circumstances. So just watch God do these great miracles. It's not anything that we can change anyway. So leave it in God's hands. Then Jacob arose, verse 17, and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock, all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock, which he had gained in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. Remember, Laban was the ancestor of Abraham's father, Terah, who was a purveyor of idols. He was an idolater. The whole family were idolatrous people. God asked Abraham to leave that life, to follow him, the one true God. So these folks still had the idols in their house. And we want to get that clear because we kind of think, well, these are all Jews now. No, this is pre-Jewish. Well, these were all the followers of Jehovah. Well, this is before God introduced himself as Jehovah. They don't know who this is yet. Remember, God doesn't introduce himself as Jehovah until Moses comes into the picture, which is later on. That's when the law was formed. That's when the Jewish religion was formed. But until this time, these are just people who gave themselves to the whims of the world. And God called them out of that, called Abraham out of it. Apparently, Jacob is coming into contact with the one true God while he marries these women who most likely were idol worshipers. They believed in these other gods. And so here is Rachel now, who wants to take the household idols, these false gods. This wasn't to be rude, I don't think. I think it's because she wanted to take her gods with her. The problem was she took her daddy's statues, and that was a problem for him. So Jacob stole away, unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him, Jacob didn't tell Laban that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Remember, he was already 3 days away in separating themselves from each other because of the size of the herds. So he had a good head start. Well, he took his brethren and with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. Obviously, Laban is going with his army, or his servant army, while Jacob had to move the herds. And that's a slower process. But God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "You be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Don't you curse him. Don't bless him. You just go and kiss your family goodbye," is basically what God is saying. So God is behind the scenes protecting Jacob and his family. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword?" He's basically saying, you've kidnapped my daughters. Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp. Okay, that wasn't going to happen. But it sounds good, right? And, you kind of feel like a big heel when that sort of thing happens. When you're going to have a conflict and you'd rather just avoid the conflict, and so you go away. But then that conflict ultimately happens, and then the person you're going to have a conflict with says, "Why didn't you just come and talk to me about it? We could have resolved it." And you feel like a heel because you feel like that's what you're supposed to do. But in this particular case, Jacob just did what God told him to do. Yeah, he may have hurt some feelings along the way, but Laban's going to have to get over that. Jacob did what the Lord told him to do. Period. You can argue about the rudeness of the whole thing. You didn't even say goodbye. You can say whatever you want. But the bottom line is Jacob did exactly what God told him to do. Take it or leave it, like it or don't like it. He's in now obedience to the living God. Notice verse 28. and you did not allow me to kiss my sons and daughters. Perhaps. But then, why did God have to warn Laban in the night in a dream? Notice it says it again. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. I want to go a little further here, and I'm going to bet, as he says, it's in my power to do you harm. I think it was in his mind to do him harm. He wanted to kill Jacob and take his daughters and all of the sheep and all that. There's no law out there. He served idols. He didn't serve the living God. He didn't have the same fear of God as what Jacob is learning at this time. And so, and now in verse 30, and now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. I get that. He's saying, I get that. But why did you steal my gods? Would you serve a God that could be kidnapped or stolen? Would you actually dedicate your life to a God who could be taken off your shelf? That seems silly, but this is really how they live their lives. And I might say, many people live their lives. Have you ever been to some countries, especially in the Eastern world, you see a lot of idols on shelves, and that's huge. Everywhere you go, these idols, the candles are being lit and incense burned in front of these idols, and they believe that this is their spiritual expression, and it's sad when you see it, and that's why it's important to bring the gospel to them. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. And honestly, that's probably what Laban would have done, if not for that divine warning that came to Laban by the Lord. With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of your brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you, for Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So this was tricky, but once again, God protected them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, Leah's tent, and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out to Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. She said to her father, excuse me, let it not displease you, my lord, that I cannot rise up before you, for the manner of women is with me. And so he searched but did not find the household idols. So the manner of women, I'll let you deal with that. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Again, in the middle of all of the lying, the manipulating, the cheating, the backstabbing, the complaining, the fleshly competition, God's sovereign will is still being worked. Even in Rachel's lie here about the idols. And now Jacob innocently is rebuking Laban. And again, it's all going to work out for the good, but it doesn't mean that it was done the way we think the Christian way is. But these weren't Christians. They were the forefathers of the Jewish faith, and ultimately forefathers to some degree of our faith, in that we can learn from them. And although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. For 20 years I've been with, and here comes his rant. Now he's telling them off. You know how it feels good to tell someone off? That's what's happening right here. He's telling them off. For 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. They're young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it, which you required from my hand. And this was an implication here that Laban was not only unreasonable, but he was unfair. It wasn't my fault that the animals got it, but you required me to pay you back for whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was, he said, in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, meaning he grazed in the desert areas, and my sheep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night when he warned you in that dream. And so if God is for us, who can separate us? That's, of course, what we have to understand from this. If God is for us, who can be against us, is what I wanted to say. And this is a truth from the New Testament, but as we see, it's also portrayed for us here in the Old. God has seen Jacob's affliction and protected him and brought him through it. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? So he wants to tell them they're all mine, but God has warned me. I can't take them from you. So what can I do? I can't fight against this God who spoke to me. Now therefore come and let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up on a pillar. And Jacob said to his brethren, gather more stones. And they took the stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. So they turned it into a pillar and a table, and they ate there. And Laban called it Yegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galid. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore, its name was called Galid, also Mizpah. Some of you know Mizpah. There used to be a little emblem that girls used to wear. They'd have half of it, kind of like a half circle with a jagged edge. The idea is that someone else had the other half. You put it together, and that's Mizpah. But this was done in a little negative way rather than a positive. That sounds so romantic, right? But that's not how it worked here. This was, I don't trust you. I don't trust you, and so I want God to keep an eye on you when we're not apart, because I don't trust that you're going to do it. And that's what verse 49 says. Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. And if you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. And then Laban said to Jacob, here is the heap, and here is this pillar which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. In other words, you can come for a family visit for Christmas, but you cannot come across with your armies to do harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Now, this is sort of interesting. If you'll notice, Laban swore by the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, his brother, and the God of their father, Terah. And Nahor is Laban's dad, and Abraham is Jacob's granddad. But as far as Laban is concerned, they're all idolaters. These are all worshipers of false gods. But Jacob says, no, I'm going to swear by my father Isaac, who believed in one God. And oh, by the way, he learned it from his father Abraham, who converted to be a man of one God. And then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned to his place. Whew, Laban, what a tough nut to crack. But notice something, how Jacob is being molded and shaped under the strict pressure and pain of a guy like Laban. So don't despise the chastening of the Lord. When you're in a tough situation, God is using that situation to form you, to mold you into a person who will walk with God and love God and be kinder and gentler to other people, even though you may not realize that's going to be the result. Don't despise it, but look for the fruit of it. Amen? Lord, thank you for the lessons learned here. We continue to learn. We continue to grow. We continue to want to see you working through people's lives, average, everyday people like these. A little odd, as I said, but we can get the point of how you were creating a nation, something different, something unique. And I thank you, Lord, that we have truth of your word. We have the New Testament to balance out the Old, and we're able to see that together they make a beautiful story and the presentation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Help us now to learn that and to live for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.